Uh-oh. Sounds like somebody's got a case of the Mondays.
You are now listening to the Unscripted Ohio podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Grove. For all the latest Buckeyes news, analysis, reaction, and the best Ohio State community on the entire internet, head over to buckeyegrove.com or follow us on Twitter at Ohio State Rivals. Without any further delay, it's time to get unscripted. Broadcasting from Podcast Central, a place that is not his mother's basement.
Hey, Mom! We get some meatloaf!
We promise. Here's your host, Kyle Lamb.
Hey, Mom! The meatloaf!
Good Monday. It is good to be back with you for the third edition of the Unscripted Ohio podcast here on BuckeyeGrove.com. Thank you for joining me. I hope everybody had a great 4th of July week, a great Independence week. I hope you had a good time with the fireworks. I hope you did not pull a Jason Pierre-Paul. I hope all your extremities are intact from July 4th last week. It certainly was a hot week. It was unbearable at times. The heat and humidity, not pleasant to be out. July 3rd for Red, White, and Boom. July 4th, both very unpleasant, but hopefully your extremities are intact and you had a great Independence week. And I'm glad you're here listening to the Unscripted Ohio podcast. I have a lot to talk about. I'm going to be flying solo today. Kevin Noon, publisher extraordinaire, Mark Gibler, recruiting expert extraordinaire, will not be able to join me to break down all these many things, especially recruiting related, as they do their vacation thing. It must be nice. Kevin's off abroad into tropical paradise. Meanwhile, I'm here. I get to spend this time with you. I'm not out in the blue seas and seeing the babes in bikinis on the beach, but I have the next best thing. I have the Unscripted Ohio listeners. I hope you can cherish the third podcast with me. Kevin's just out looking for his stranded island. He wants his ginger. Who knows what Kevin's doing, but I hope he did enjoy his vacation. But we do have a lot of recruiting to talk about. Before I get into all that, and I have another topic I want to go into that has a little bit to do with recruiting. I will tell you later on the show, in Buckeye Beat segment, I've got some basketball news to go into. A big recruiting visit for the basketball program coming up on Wednesday. I will tell you who that is, and I will also give you my take on that and why this is such a big deal. But Ohio State is in the Final Three for a top 20 recruit, big-time player, and I will tell you who that is and more about it later in the show. I also want to get in a little bit of Cavs, maybe some Blue Jackets if I have time. Of course, this is Unscripted Ohio, so it is an Ohio sports podcast on top of being Ohio State. Obviously, Ohio State is the primary reason you're probably here. It's certainly the reason I'm employed. It's the reason I have a job. It's to talk about the Buckeyes. There's a lot to talk about with recruiting. Being summer, it's not quite football season, although it's just right around the corner. Big Ten Media Days coming up here later in July. BuckeyeGrove.com will have all the coverage from Chicago. And once Media Days are over, we're going to be in the start of August, and training camp will be here. Players will report. Before you know it, it'll be football season. But we're passing the time away with a lot of recruiting information because the Buckeyes are just absolutely knocking it out of the park in football recruiting right now, especially that 2020 class. We do have a 2019 announcement coming up today from Kane Patterson of Nashville, top 8 linebacker in the country. We'll announce. Some of you are probably listening to this after he's already announced, but he's expected to pick the Buckeyes over Tennessee and Alabama and Texas A&M. But he will announce at noon local time in Nashville. That is 1 p.m. Eastern time or 1 p.m. in Ohio. He's expected to pick the Buckeyes again. 2019 recruit Kane Patterson expected to choose Ohio State. But they're knocking it out of the park with this 2020 class. There's a lot to talk about there. Let's start because I saw an interesting topic on the Horseshoe Lounge message board on Buckeye Grove, and I really want to talk about this because I think it's something that fascinates me, and so I'm going to go into a monologue, maybe a diatribe, however you want to categorize this. I'm going to be a little long-winded, but I hope you'll bear with me. Let's start with the genesis of the conversation. Of course, the Buckeyes picked up a 5th commitment in the 2020 class from Luke Whippler this week. He's one of the top guards in the country, number 3 to his position on Rivals. Just like the other 4, actually, all 5 of those players are top 5 players at their positions, which just is incredible when you consider that class has guys like Brian Bresci, the top player in the country, defensive end, who's expected to eventually pick Ohio State. I know that's not a done deal, and I don't want to suggest it is, but that could be on the heels of the number 1 player in the country and number 1 defensive end in the country, Zach Harrison, possibly picking Ohio State in the 2019 class. But this 2020 class, off to just an absolutely sensational start, and there's more potentially coming. Raheem Jarrett, receiver out of DC, top 50 player, announcing his Final Four on Sunday: Ohio State, Penn State, Florida State, Alabama. He's a guy that is expected to eventually pick Ohio State. It just goes on and on when you look down at the list. Darian Henry, another defensive end from Cincinnati, that the Buckeyes are favored to land eventually. So many players in that class, and it's really fueled by the fact that there are these super aggressive recruiters like Harry Miller and LeJon Cabezos and Paris Johnson and Jack Miller. These guys are all jumping right in. They're putting their feet in the fire, they're jumping into the pool. They're not going the shallow end first. They're just jumping right in head first, and they're becoming aggressive recruiters that are going out and really selling the success of this Ohio State program and what it can be. And the 2020 class is going to be nothing short of phenomenal. I think when it's all said and done on paper, and I talked about this last week, I really believe it's going to be the best class that we've seen under Urban Meyer at Ohio State. But the Luke Whippler commitment is interesting because we're seeing a trend here. We saw it with Whippler picking Ohio State over Stanford. We saw it with Harry Miller picking Ohio State over Stanford. And this discussion really emanated on the Horseshoe Lounge message board, and I was sitting there finding myself nodding because I agree that this is really putting Ohio State in a position where it's winning some of these recruits, these recruiting battles, because of where Ohio State stands right now as a perceived academic institution. And it doesn't just apply to academics. I mean, you look at the father of LeJon Cabezos, he commented this week that Real Life Wednesdays, the program where Urban Meyer has throughout the season, where on Wednesdays they bring in speakers to teach leadership skills and just teach people how to be better individuals, better boyfriends, better sons, better husbands. This is about making people get the most out of their potential in their jobs and their chosen careers and professions beyond football. Because let's be honest, while most of these guys have dreams and aspirations and goals to be big-time NFL stars, most of them are not going to be. Most of them are going to be, even if they get drafted, they're going to be out of the league after their first contract, if not within a year or two. So it's important for these players to have something to fall back on, and leadership is a big thing. I mean, one of my friends is a leadership and life coach, and it's so important because you can apply these leadership skills to anything you're doing in life. And Ohio State is selling this on top of the academic reputation. They're selling the leadership skills as a big selling point, and it's working. It's great for parents and coaches and players to hear that they can be better people in addition to being better students and better people in their lives, and better students and better people. And I think it's important what Ohio State is selling, but it's really starting with the academic reputation. If you think back to Ohio State where it was 20 years ago, and many of you know this because a lot of people went to Ohio State. It's always been a huge institution, one of the biggest in the world. And you went to Ohio State, and many of you were great students, but you were great students in a sea of basically anybody that wanted to go to Ohio State could go to Ohio State, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I personally don't like judging an institution based on selectivity. I think that's academic snobbery. I don't like critiquing the institution based on who you allow, because it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you only allow the smartest, brightest minds, you only allow the best students to get in, of course it's going to be a better institution because you're teaching smarter kids. I like to be judging institutions and schools based on the programs, the quality of the education. How many people are you putting out into the real world? How many people are graduating? How many are learning, are becoming better students because of the quality of the education, the quality of the professors, the quality of the program? And so I'm not crazy about selectivity being the thing that makes or breaks an institution. And so there was nothing wrong with Ohio State back when the average ACT score was a 20 or 21. But the fact is, it has just absolutely, it's been insane to see the growth and the change. And now we're talking about an average ACT score of just over 30. And that puts it in a category of public Ivy. And that's where it's interesting, because in the case of Harry Miller or Luke Whippler, Ohio State usually would win out on recruits like that anyhow. You know, it's a football powerhouse. It's always been one of the top recruiting schools in the country because of that, because of the reputation, because of the success that Ohio State has had traditionally throughout the years, being one of the top 3 to 5 programs historically. It's always won those recruiting battles more times than it has lost. But there were always those straddlers, those isolated cases, those one-off situations where a guy like Harry Miller might pick Stanford over Ohio State because the academic reputation of a place like Stanford, or the public Ivy reputation of a place like the University of Michigan or the University of Virginia or the University of Texas. And these are the schools most traditionally associated with public Ivies, which of course is just a term for a public institution being similar to the quality of an Ivy League institution, such as Harvard or Yale or Columbia or Penn or what have you. But, Stanford or Vanderbilt or Duke, Northwestern, these schools would occasionally pluck off a Luke Whippler or Harry Miller in the past. But Ohio State is getting to the point now where it is and has become a public Ivy, and it has done so without the drawback of losing students. For instance, the University of Michigan's undergrad population is under 30,000, just over 30,000 total when you add in the graduate programs and all the master's and doctorate students at the university. But Ohio State, on the other hand, is still over 55,000 total population. It has not lost. In fact, it continues to grow. Ohio State built all those new dorms on campus for 2 reasons. Number one, they were having sophomores, they were requiring sophomores to stay on campus for their second years. But also, the university continues to grow. They expect to be over 60,000 here in the next several years. It's just amazing to see what Ohio State has done without having to cut back on admissions. As far as from a number standpoint, when it comes to selectivity, they've gone from the average ACT score of 20 to average of 30, but they continue to be one of the largest universities in the country and in the world. And that really is impressive. So Ohio State has become a public Ivy, and because of that, it has become a force, not just in recruiting and on the field, but also academically. And the only drawback is this, and you may be saying, well, Kyle, there can't possibly be a drawback to being one of the best academic institutions in the world. And I agree with that, and I'm certainly not saying that this is a reason not to be like this. But in addition to not wanting to judge an institution based on selectivity, and I'm not saying Ohio State lacks in quality because it's got a lot of great programs. The med school is top-notch. Fisher School of Business is top-notch. There are so many great programs at Ohio State, and the perceived education you get within those programs is second to none in many, many cases. The only thing I don't like, and I hear a lot of you on talk shows, on call-in shows in Columbus talk about this. I see a lot of you speak about it on Twitter and on message boards. The issue for me is Ohio State. There are people at Ohio State within the academic community, academia, if you will, that would love nothing more than the Ohio State University to become this safe haven for students to go and study for 4 to 8 years and never step foot inside a bar, never step foot inside of a house that has a big party going on. It's doing everything it can to price out students from the average everyday bar. It's, of course, campus partners. They're buying up a bunch of property on campus and basically forcing the bars out of their leases. Some of them are just not renewing the leases. But the point is, Ohio State, for all the great things going on campus right now, and don't get me wrong, there's a Target being built on campus. There is so much that is great to see at Ohio State. There's a lot of great change, a lot of new buildings, millions and millions, hundreds of $1 million in new construction projects, which included, this new Target that's getting ready to open on High Street, new volleyball arena, wrestling practice facility. You name it. There are so many great construction projects, but one of the byproducts here is Ohio State would love to get rid of the bar scene. And there's kind of a downside to all this because one of the great things about Ohio State, some of you have so many great memories of the Ohio State University, not just because of your time as a student and because of the jobs and careers it gave you after you graduated, but also the experience. And the experience, I think, for me, is a big part of going to college, and I don't want some academic snobs to take that away. And I'm not trying to say Ohio State is going to turn into that, but it does seem to be trending in that direction. That's the only part of this that I don't like. I don't want to see High Street turned into this ultra upscale place where no students hang out. It just wouldn't be the same, and that's what it's turning into, unfortunately. But Ohio State is a public Ivy now, and all of the construction and all of the byproducts aside, and what is happening to the social culture at Ohio State, it is incredible to see the growth and transformation. And I don't want to say it's great to see Ohio State because they have become selective and are not allowing students with 21 ACT scores into the university. To me, that's not necessarily a good thing. I don't think that there's anything wrong with those students going to get an education. If you're driven, if you know what you want out of life and you work hard and study hard, you're going to be a great student. You're going to get a great education. And so it's not fair to judge a university based on the quality of students. That's why I don't like when Ohio State fans were throwing in the face of, let's pick a school, Louisville. Louisville is known for a commuter school. I don't like criticizing institutions based on, well, you let anyone in, so you're a bad institution. It shouldn't be like that, and I don't want Ohio State to celebrate merely being selective with the process. But that said, it is perceived as a public Ivy. It has definitely helped recruiting. It is incredible to see that 2020 class, and it's incredible to see what Ohio State has done. So all I'm saying is, as this pertains to Ohio State football and football recruiting going forward, Ohio State's in a position now where it can continue to clean up on all of the great prospects that it has gotten in the past. But those straddlers, those one-off situations where you might see a guy slip out to Stanford or Northwestern or Michigan or Texas or Virginia, in the past that may have been the case occasionally, it's not going to be the case anymore. And 2020 class is going to be awesome for many, many different reasons. Football talent-wise, specifically, that class is going to be, I think, Urban Meyer's best class. But big picture, in the macro, when you look at what Ohio State is becoming, there are a lot of great days for Ohio State going forward. So hit me up on Twitter at KYLam8. I'm curious what you think about this. Are you excited that Ohio State is now becoming a public Ivy? How do you think there is a downside? Are you worried about the culture maybe cutting into this? Are you worried about the experience? Will it scare away some potential prospects because maybe Ohio State has gone the opposite direction of a party school and maybe it's just too buttoned down and not a fun experience? Are you worried about that being the case? I don't think that's going to be the case, but I'm curious your opinions. Hit me up on Twitter at KYLam8. Would love to hear from you on this topic. What do you think about Ohio State's transformation as a university? Now, speaking of transformation, before I get into the Buckeye Beat segment and we go over this big recruiting week for Ohio State basketball, I want to talk about the Cavs real fast because obviously people have had time to digest the departure of LeBron James. We're in a situation of post-LeBron where it's awkward for Cavs fans because the excitement has been zapped, the expectations have been zapped. Suddenly, you've gone from expecting a finals appearance every year now to not even being sure if the Cavs are going to win 20 games. When LeBron left in 2010, the Cavs won 19 games the next year, which just speaks to the greatness of LeBron. Now, this is not going to be that situation, despite the fact that LeBron didn't have a lot of help this year. I think this roster is still far better than that 2010 roster was when LeBron left. And some of it is because the Cavs do have some burgeoning young players to be excited about. And I think a lot will depend on what the Cavs do with the rebuilding process. I think at bare minimum, you're going to want roster flexibility. You're going to want to try to get rid of JR's salary. You're going to want to try to get rid of Tristan's salary. I would not be opposed to keeping George Hill around, if nothing else, than to be a mentor to Colin Sexton. I saw Sexton a lot at Alabama this year. Going to be a great player. If he can get his shooting percentage above 36%-ish, which is average, he was 33% as a freshman in Alabama, and history shows very often players make a big jump from their freshman to sophomore years. Now, Sexton is not going to have that sophomore year at Alabama to make that jump, but I think with enough time, it may not be his first year in the NBA, but within the first couple years of his career, I think he will make that jump to be an average shooter, and he's got the kind of skills of a John Wall or a Derrick Rose that if he can improve that shooting, he's going to be that caliber player because he's got the quickness, he's got the ball handling, he's got the toughness, the defense. He can get to the rim and finish at the rim. He's got all the skills you look for in a point guard. He's not the flashiest of passers, but he makes the right pass on time and on target. Looking the part so far in Summer League, and yes, it is just Summer League, so we're not going to get carried away there. But I think you get rid of the salary, you get back under the salary cap, you at least give some flexibility for signing free agents going forward, and we're not going to be under illusions that a major free agent's going to sign with the Cavs. We're realists here. I think we know the Cavs are not going to go out and get a big-time free agent, but I would like to create that flexibility just in case somebody does come along. I would keep Rodney Hood, Jordan Clarkson, Larry Nance. Let them be good young role players and develop a roster around Colin Sexton. Jetty Osman is looking like Kyle Korver this summer. If you've been watching highlights of him overseas back in Turkey in the FIBA games, been watching him in Summer League, he's shooting with so much confidence. He's got a quick release. His shot has really improved. You add in his savvy for the game, his feel for the game, and his defense and effort, I think Jetty Osman has a good career ahead of him. Ante Zizic, the guy that the Cavs acquired in the Isaiah Thomas, Jay Crowder for Kyrie Irving trade, he put up 25 points, 11 rebounds in game number 2 of the Summer League. Again, it is Summer League, but it is interesting to see him have that performance. Billy Preston, the would-have-been Kansas player who went overseas to play, got hurt. The Cavs took hip flyer on him. Will they catch lightning in a bottle with Preston, who's certainly got the athleticism, explosive nature? He's a guy that could be a great NBA player. It's interesting. If you ask me, I think the Cavs need to get rid of these high salary guys, Korver, JR, Tristan, George Hill, but keep Kevin Love, provided your socks aren't knocked off with a great trade offer. If somebody comes along and wants to trade a lottery pick for Kevin Love or trade an under 25 guy who's got a bright future in the NBA, then you have to certainly look at trading Kevin Love. But don't trade Kevin Love just for the sake of trading his salary. It needs to be a good basketball trade. Otherwise, I keep Love around. I'm not one of those guys that thinks you have to go full-on tank mode necessarily. You can put an interesting, exciting young team around Kevin Love and still have a decent pick and be good, but still be able to improve through a top 10, top 15 pick over the next couple of years. That's what I would do if I'm the Cavs. Long story short, the expectations are no longer there, but following Colin Sexton and Jetty's development this summer and the potential of Billy Preston and wild cards like Ante Zizic, I'm really excited right now to see where this Cavs core goes in the future, and I'm not under any illusion the Cavs are going to be back in the finals this year and beating Golden State. That's not going to happen. But I do think it will be fun and interesting to watch the Cavs going forward, and that's all we can ask as a Cavs fan right now. Let's just have fun, interesting basketball being played up there at the Q. And if that happens, at least it'll be fun to just sit back and enjoy watching the Cavs without having expectations or disappointment. Not saying that there was a lot of disappointment with LeBron because they did get to 4 finals and they won a title. But at the same time, with all the drama that was around, it is good to just sit back with fresh eyes and watch the Cavs and see what happens.
Stretch runtime here at Unscripted Ohio. Kick up your feet as we cross the finish line with the Buckeye Beat, the latest in Ohio State news and notes.
Kick the tires and light the fires, Big Daddy.
So I teased it. I mentioned it at the top of the show. Let's get into Ohio State basketball recruiting here before we wrap the podcast up for today. Ohio State getting an official visit on Wednesday from DJ Carton. If you recognize that name, of course, we've talked about him on the show. Last week, actually, we spoke about DJ with Corey Evans of Rivals. We talked about how Ohio State has him as their number 1 point guard prospect, probably their number 1 overall player still on the board. Of course, they have Alonzo Gaffney, a top 30 player, already committed. C.J. Walker, transfer from Florida State, is also in that class. Be sitting out, will be on Ohio State's roster this year, practicing, but will not be eligible until next year. But DJ Carton is the guy that Ohio State really wants to land. Carton has been to Ohio State unofficially, visited Indiana and Michigan officially in late June. There was some thought, some speculation that the Buckeyes would get the final visit possibly in September or October. But as it turns out, it looks like DJ is going to be expediting the timetable, wants to speed up his process, his decision, so he will be visiting Ohio State officially on Wednesday. Look, this is, as far as potential recruits are concerned, DJ Carton is one of those must-get point guards. Number 13 overall player, one of the top point guards in the country. He's a McDonald's All-American type of talent. He's a guy that Ohio State has not had a lot of throughout their history. You look at Mike Conley, definitely a guy that is that caliber. Wound up number 4 player in the NBA draft after his freshman year. What's interesting about that is nobody thought Conley would be that good that quickly, especially. I think people that had watched Mike Conley knew they were getting a really good player, but there was a general sentiment that he was just tagging along there with Greg Oden. Now, anybody that watched Conley extensively, look, they knew that was not the case. They knew Mike Conley was one of the better point guards in the country, but I don't think anybody imagined Conley being as good as he was. They certainly were not expecting him to be a one-and-done type player. That was the case for Greg Oden, obviously. Mike Conley, not a one-and-done guy. But D'Angelo Russell, Mike Conley, DJ Carton is that type of player potentially for Ohio State, if not in his first year, definitely second or third year if Ohio State is fortunate enough to land him and get him on campus for a couple years. He is that kind of player. Would fit in great with a class of Alonzo Gaffney, E.J. Liddell, who we mentioned with Corey last week on the podcast. Ohio State probably is favored for E.J. Liddell. That would be a great three-man class right there. Then you add in the possibility of maybe a fourth if things break the right way for a Trace Jackson Davis on top of that. Bottom line, though, DJ Carton announcing on Sunday on Twitter he is down to a final three of Indiana, Ohio State, and Michigan, and he will visit Ohio State officially this week. So huge visit for the Buckeyes and the basketball program. We will definitely keep our eyes on this visit because it's a chance for Ohio State to go out and knock his socks off. I think the downside to this is if he had waited to visit in September, then maybe the Indiana and Michigan visits are out of his mind a little bit. They would be, receded back to the back of his memory, and Ohio State could blow his socks off with an Ohio State football Saturday and an official visit and be fresh in his mind and maybe win the battle after a couple months not thinking about Indiana and Michigan as prominently. So while that's the downside, I think the upside here is Ohio State is in great shape. I'm not one to judge where a guy will go based on his Twitter account, but I will say if you scan his Twitter and his follows and his likes, there's a lot to be intrigued about when it comes to Ohio State. He's following over half the Ohio State basketball team, all four basketball coaches, Scoonie Penn, D'Angelo Russell, the official Ohio State account, the Ohio State Hoops recruiting account. He's definitely very involved with Ohio State on Twitter, and that's not uncommon for a recruit. In fact, I checked this because I was curious his involvement with Indiana, Michigan, and he's, of course, following the official accounts and a couple of coaches for each program, but he's not following Indiana players or Michigan players. He's not following Indiana recruits, Michigan recruits. So when you compare and contrast that in itself, it really is fascinating. I'm not going to say he's going to pick Ohio State because of who he follows on Twitter, but I do think sometimes you can get an idea of where a player is at, where a kid is at in his mind, and he definitely has a lot of Ohio State influence there. It's just fascinating. Again, I'm not going to say he's picking Ohio State because of that, but it's something to keep in mind. I do think the Buckeyes are in great shape here. They were at one time potentially the leader for the last couple of months. Michigan is thought to be the team in front. I think Ohio State, if they were behind, has closed that gap. Let's see what happens this week. We'll keep our eyes on it, but it is a huge visit for the Buckeyes. If they can get DJ Carton to commit on this visit or shortly thereafter, would be tremendous for the basketball program, would certainly turn into one of the best recruiting classes Ohio State has had, probably since that Cook, Conley, Leidy, Oden class in 2007. So we'll keep our eyes on that, as well as all of this crazy 2020 football recruiting. Thank you for giving me a listen today. That is going to wrap the show up. Of course, catch me on Twitter at KYLam8. Are you excited about DJ Carton's visit? Are you excited about all these 2020 football commitments? Tell me what you think about Ohio State becoming a public Ivy. Would love to hear from you. Tweet at me, KYLam8. That's going to do it today for the show. Of course, you can catch us on BuckeyeGrove.com and on the archives, Google Play, iTunes, SoundCloud, and Stitcher. Until next Monday, have a great week, everybody. Go Bucks.
You can get new episodes of Unscripted Ohio on Mondays and Fridays exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all things Ohio State.